Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What is an interesting tweet from the good people at the Boxing Voice, who made the recommendation that former champion Regis Prograis should take on former champion Rolly Romero, now that they are both coming off of losses.
Yes.
Regis to his loss to Devin Haney and Rolly to his loss to Isaac Cruz this past weekend. To that, Regis Prograis himself responded, "Fuck Rolly, I want Pitbull for the belt."
It's a good fight.
If it were next, I would favor Regis Prograis to win the fight. I said as much on my own social media account and actually got some pushback for it. I was surprised how many people were trying to wag their finger in my face, telling me that Isaac would be too much for Regis Prograis.
These are Gervonta Davis fans.
That's who these people are. What they're really trying to do when they talk down Regis Prograis is indirectly talk down Devin Haney for having beaten him, because we know there's a rivalry between Devin and Gervonta, the Haney fans, the Tank fans.
They talk down Regis and belittle him as a means to belittle Devin Haney.
And they talk up Isaac Cruz as a means to talk up Gervonta Davis.
That's what it is.
My assertion of a Prograis versus Cruz fight has absolutely nothing to do with either Devin Haney or Gervonta Davis, and has everything to do with the style of the fighters, the style of the match. Styles making fights. As they say, Regis has the right style for Isaac Cruz.
Are you sure about that? Did you see him with Devin Haney in his last fight?
Just did. And Isaac Cruz fights nothing like Devin Haney. In fact, they're polar opposites in every way you can imagine. Where Devin is a long and limber outside fighter, outside jabber, Isaac is a short and stumpy inside fighter.
They're nothing alike.
What it is that Regis Prograis has been struggling with in his last two fights is movement. The movement of Danielito Zorrilla, the movement and the jab of Devin Haney, that if you force Regis to chase you, he's vulnerable. But with Isaac, you wouldn't have to chase him, because Isaac's going to come to him. He's a pressure guy.
He's the shortest, stumpiest fighter. He doesn't have a choice.
To look at Regis struggling with the height, the length, and the movement of Danielito Zorrilla, then struggle with the same thing against Devin Haney.
Isaac don't bring none of those things to the table. He's not an outside fighter. He's not going to move lateral and stay behind his jab because he has no jab, even when he's coming forward.
It's a gross overestimation to say that because Regis struggled with Danielito Zorrilla and Devin Haney, that he would also struggle with Isaac when Isaac fights nothing like those guys. Physically and stylistically, Isaac Cruz would be at a great disadvantage opposite the ring Regis Prograis, because Isaac's a pressure fighter, whereas Regis is a boxer puncher, a counter puncher, which just so happens to be the pressure fighter's kryptonite.
Why?
The boxer puncher, the counter puncher likes to do is hang back, shift their weight onto their back foot, and set the guy up, try to catch him coming in. And Isaac, he's going to try to come in. He doesn't have a choice. He's not long enough to box from the outside. He has to fight on the inside.
And he's got no jab.
His methodology of closing the distance is barreling forward behind that tight guard, then firing big looping right hands, looping shots that Regis Prograis can roll and counter. Roll those looping shots off the shoulder, then counter with a right uppercut up the middle, or a right hook around the side.
Be target practice for Regis.
Regis is a little bigger, a little longer, a little stronger than Isaac Cruz. Isaac hasn't felt full-on super lightweight power, you understand.
Rolly Romero is not the best advertisement for what 140 has to offer, and all he really did was overwhelm Rolly Romero, who ain't no good anyway.
You put him in there with Regis, all of his deficiencies will be put on display the same way that Regis's deficiencies were put on display with Devin.
Styles make fights.
Regis struggles with guys that he has to chase, but he wouldn't struggle with Isaac because he doesn't have to chase him. He doesn't have to find him. Isaac would come to him, at which point he can open him up with those counter punches, those counter shots, uppercuts up the middle, hooks around the side. It'd be target practice.
I'd favor Regis to win the fight, if the fight were next, but fight's not going to be next. Fight's never going to happen.
Isaac Cruz, now that he's WBA champion, already has a mandatory challenger in the queue in the form of Ishmael Barroso. And outside of Ishmael, who he may have to one day satisfy, he's likely gunning for a Gervonta Davis rematch.
He's not going to give Regis the time of day.
He's not going to voluntarily give Regis Prograis a title shot. This kid and his team were insufferable before they won the WBA title. Afterwards, it's just going to be waste. So Regis is barking up the wrong tree anyway. And if what Regis wants is a title shot, he needn't look any further than his own matchroom stablemate, Subriel Matias.
He's right there.
It's the same stylistic matchup as an Isaac Cruz fight with a better brand, higher tier of pressure fighter, and a more dangerous guy.
Stronger guy.
Bigger too, with more ring coverage, tighter hooks, tighter uppercuts, more devastating mid-range to inside than the indefensible Isaac Cruz.
Not all pressure fighters are built equal. There's D-level pressure fighters, C, B, A.
Isaac Cruz is a relatively low-level pressure fighter, very crude.
Subriel's got more to him.
He's bigger, stronger, more dangerous, more devastating mid-range to inside. If what Regis really wants is a title shot, that guy's right there. If he makes it through the Liam Pato fight, Regis should hit him up. I think he's still got one more fight left on his existing matchroom deal.
Stylistically, the fight favors Regis, but it's physically where the question mark lies.
It's a great fight that matchroom can make in-house, but is it a fight that Regis Prograis wants? Elsewhere in the world of boxing, recapping this past weekend's action on the Boxer Show that took place on Sunday, the Alen Babic versus Steve Robinson heavyweight fight where Alen Babic rebounded off his knockout loss to Lukas Rozansky by knocking out Steve Robinson. Steve, God bless him, a noticeably taller fighter, longer fighter, and just a bigger guy overall than Alen, did not have the movement or presence with the lead hand to manage the distance against the noticeably shorter fighter. Time and time again throughout the contest, Alen Babic was able to close the distance and get off big hooks, big shots on Steve Robinson because Steve couldn't keep him out.
Yeah, he was a taller guy, bigger guy, but it's not just being bigger, it's how you use it.
All that height and all that length counts for nothing if you don't use it, if you keep letting the smaller guy get close to you, and that's what Alen Babic did. It doesn't look like a whole lot changed about Alen Babic from when last we saw him. He's still an aggressive, mid-range to inside pressure guy, volume guy who likes to wing big shots, big punches within close quarters. He very much seems limited to that due to his limited stature, that he's a small heavyweight.
He's got no choice but to be an inside fighter.
And yeah, so long as he can get inside, he can do some damage. Against Steven Robinson, he was able to do that round after round after round for 6 rounds before the referee had finally seen enough and decided to call it.
He's beating Steve like a drum.
It's because of what I told you. You can be taller than a guy and longer than a guy, but if you don't take that half step back and pump out that jab and keep pumping out that jab to keep the smaller man at the end of it, sooner or later he's going to get inside and he's going to let his hands go. When he does, at that proximity, he's got the advantage because he doesn't need as much room to work.
He's a shorter guy with shorter arms. He doesn't need as much room to drive his punches and put power on them, whereas the taller guy with longer arms, he does.
Steven did, making the mistake of letting the close quarters fighter get within close quarters, get within striking distance. In truth, I don't believe that Alen Babic has to reinvent the wheel.
He has his limitations. Most fighters do.
Though it's hard to imagine that anyone could excel trying to be something that they're not. You're not going to turn Alen Babic into some cerebral fighter or some sugarfoot guy. You're not going to turn him into a boxer. What you can do is improve upon what he already has and what he already is. And what he is a banger. What he is a mid-range to inside pressure fighter. Thus, he needs all the bells and whistles associated with that.
Yeah.
Head movement, upper body movement, slipping punches, rolling and countering.
Closing the distance safely.
In a variety of ways to get close to what will often be the bigger man, the bigger fighter, the double jab, the triple jab.
To keep the other guy's guns holstered while you come forward. Maybe you don't double up on the jab. Maybe you slip and hook. Bait the guy to throw so you can counter what he throws.
Or catching and countering. Coming forward in that high guard, tucked behind it, to catch the shot on the arms and gloves so you can counter the guy that way. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and you need variety to toggle through these different options to get to the guy and land punches.
Getting to him cutting off the ring as opposed to following the guy in a straight line.
You don't want to do that because then you're open to be hit. What you want to do is cut off the ring. Use the corners to do it. There are better and more effective ways to be a close quarters fighter than what we see from Allen, and these are the areas I think he needs to improve upon. He doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, try to become more of a boxer, more of a sugarfoot guy. He just needs to be a better pressure fighter.
This was on the undercard of the Clarke versus Fabio Wardley fight. It just so happens that Fabio Wardley, Allen Babic, they're managed by Dillian Veit.
These are his fighters, two of them on the same show, on Sky Sports, on Boxer. You start to wonder if Dillian Veit won't partner up with Boxer, won't partner up with Sky Sports. They need the bodies, they need the marquee value he brings to the table.
To compete with Matchroom, to compete with Queensberry.
I have to admit that this past Sunday's show was a hell of a show, one of the better shows that Boxer has put on in recent memory.
Clarke versus Fabio Wardley was a great fight. It lived up to the hype.
Comes to that fight, for me, the best way to describe it is ability versus application. The natural talent and ability of Fabio Wardley, who has no amateur background, save a few white-collar fights.
That's it.
Versus the application, the tactician, the technician that is Clarke, who I don't think is as talented as Fabio, but he is more well-schooled. The way he kept walking him into those uppercuts.
Exploiting a fundamental flaw in Fabio when he's coming forward, it seems that Fabio's just as big a sucker for an uppercut as his mentor, Dillian Veit. Couldn't get out of the way of those things.
That punch, the rest of the time, what got my attention is how Fabio's punches were a lot sharper and more damaging, heavier than what you saw from Frazier.
Even though Frazier was landing some big punches too.
But the knockdown didn't help Frazier, being knocked down by Fabio Wardley and having a point deducted. That didn't help the case for Frazier either, what was so obviously a low blow, a deliberate low blow in the clinch.
Yeah, well, Fabio getting his nose exploded across his face, that didn't help his case either.
Couldn't close that cut, couldn't control that bleeding. I couldn't imagine watching this thing. How difficult it must have been for Fabio to try to fight on, try to power on with his nose in the condition that it was in. But that's why he impresses me so much, because here you have a guy who ain't Team GB. He don't come from some extensive amateur background, and yet he still has so much of what you need to make it in pugilism, the toughness, the grit, and the natural ability, the power. I still think Fabio is a better physical specimen than Clarke, but no complaints from me. The judges scored it a draw, and I have it the same way. I could see that, and I'd love to see a rematch.
Boxer could certainly use one.
What was a fight of the year contender for me, an early entrant here at the start of 2024. You could put some asses in some seats if they run it back. Though given how physically taxing the fight was for both men, I mean, the state of Fabio's nose, and look at Frazier. After the final bell sounded, he collapsed on the ropes, how tired he was.
These guys need a vacation.
They both do. It was an excellent fight. Excellent. And a good advertisement for Boxer's brand of boxing. If you keep putting on fights like this, you may yet be able to compete with the bigger and more established promoters in the UK, Matchroom,
Queensberry.
This was a hell of a fight. Both boys put on a hell of a show. Congratulations to them. And just in keeping with the theme of all things heavyweight, Deontay Wilder's trainer, Malik Scott, on the Joseph Parker defeat says, I think Deontay has a killer instinct that you can't suppress, but I think he enjoyed the ayahuasca. He said it made him a bit content and understand the smaller and softer things in life. Violence wasn't a top priority that night, and I think that's why we came up short. Deontay is a killer. He's violent. That Deontay didn't show up that night. But that's not the fighter you're going to see in his next fight. Would feel like empty promises, seem like empty promises, because when exactly did he take the ayahuasca? Was it before or after he knocked out Robert Helenius?
It was before.
The earliest mention of Deontay Wilder embarking on this spiritual journey by getting high off psychedelic mushrooms is in the summer of 2022. The following winter, he knocked out Robert Helenius.
So was it the ayahuasca that sapped his killer instinct, or put simply, is it that he ran into a wall because he fought a fighter who's a better fighter than most fighters he usually fights.
I think he may have reached some kind of catharsis with the internal turmoil that he's been experiencing since his two demoralizing losses to Tyson Fury. I think the ayahuasca has its role to play, but the role should not be overstated. If something was really eating at Deontay Wilder and something may have sapped his confidence and his belief in himself, his killer instinct, and that flame perhaps being diminished, I think the two demoralizing losses to Tyson Fury have more to do with that than just some psychedelic mushrooms. It's a perfect storm is what it is, because here you have a fighter of limited boxing ability who has padded his record with no-hopers and journeymen for years, amassed a hefty knockout percentage against what was limited opposition.
Yes.
He developed a false sense of self and a false sense of confidence as a result of that, i.e., he drunk his own Kool-Aid.
Yes.
So when he goes in there with a Tyson Fury,
a guy battling addiction, obesity, supposedly mental health issues, Wilder expects that he should beat him. He should beat him easy, except that he fought him 3 times and he didn't beat him once.
And the beating that he got, a systematic beating, it would have been better for Wilder to get stopped in the very first round, just a flash knockdown, a flash knockout, than get beat round after round after round, knocked down.
Fury broke his spirit.
After that second fight and the beating that he got, I feel like Tyson Fury broke his fighting spirit. Afterwards, he starts up with the glove tampering accusations, the cheating allegations. He starts up with all of that, only to go completely silent. Radio silent in the press conference for what was the third fight.
You had so much to say when the guy wasn't around, but when he was, you couldn't find your voice.
I think that Tyson Fury broke his spirit, though it's not just Tyson Fury breaking his spirit, it's that he finally started fighting fighters that were better than the fighters that he had been fighting for years. I think it's safe to say that Tyson Fury had been better than anyone he had fought up until that point. I think it's safe to say something similar about Joseph Parker, that Joseph Parker is in many ways a better fighter than most fighters that Wilder had fought.
You could say that too.
So it's really a combination of things, that he finally stepped up in class and he couldn't hack it.
He couldn't deal.
Maybe he's not as powerful as he thinks he is, so reliant on his power and the big right hand. Well, you landed your best shot on Tyson Fury several times, and it wasn't enough to keep him down.
He still beat you.
With Joseph Parker, a former champion like yourself and a more skilled and crafty boxer, more malleable than most guys Wilder fights, with him, you couldn't even find your right hand with him.
He overwhelmed you.
No, I wouldn't chalk it all up to the ayahuasca. I think Wilder was a broken man before he took the ayahuasca, and that's why he ended up taking it. And that just made matters worse.
You're dealing with the internal turmoil of losing those Tyson Fury fights. You try to reach some kind of catharsis by going on this spiritual journey, and all that did was soften you up. So by the time they put you in there with Joseph, who's already more skilled than you are, and more skilled than most guys you fight.
And that's the other thing. I don't want to dumb down Joseph's victory over Wilder. I don't want to talk it down by focusing on what was or what wasn't Wilder's killer instincts. That's your job.
Staying sharp.
Staying hungry is your job. Your mental state is all on you, the same way his mental state is all on him. You've had losses, but so is he. You were a champion, but so was he.
On the night, he was just better. He was the better man.
Now Wilder's rumored to be facing the same Zhilei Zhang that Joseph Parker just got past, that Joseph Parker just barely survived.
Wilder's fighting him now, that's what they're saying.
And we're left questioning whether or not Deontay Wilder still has his fighting spirit. Maybe what that heralds is that he shouldn't be fighting at all.